Hello and welcome. In this video, I'm going to try to describe how you can choose which statistic to use for a given research scenario. At this point in the semester, you only have three to choose from: the Z for an individual score, the Z for a sample mean, and the single sample T, which can also be called a T for a sample mean. Where I'd encourage you to start is by reading the scenario and trying to identify if it's asking about a sample or a group of people, or if it's really trying to identify an individual score. So in this first scenario, if you read it, you're going to find that at the very end, it's going to ask what percentage of students would fall. So it's really talking about what percentage of students, or what percentage of scores really would you expect to receive scores at or below 400. It's really talking about individual scores, not sample means. Nowhere in here does it mention anything about taking a sample of people and then comparing them to some number or something like that. It's talking about scores. Nowhere in there does it mention a sample or a group of scores. It doesn't literally have to say the word sample. Nowhere in there does it say anything like, I took a group of people and wanted to see the probability of getting their mean to be blah, blah, blah. Nowhere in here is it talking about a mean. Nowhere in here is it talking about a sample. So in that case, you're going to be wanting to use a Z for an individual score. What you're going to be trying to do in this situation is trying to find the Z score that corresponds to a raw score of 400. So you're really focusing on an individual score of 400 and converting that to a Z. However, when you get to other situations like this one, you're trying to identify sampling error. It's asking what is the probability that sampling error would result. Sampling error means you must have had a sample. That sampling error would result in obtaining a sample mean of blah, 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 blah. And then it's giving you the sample size. So it's very clear you're talking about a group of people. It even says sample. Again, it doesn't have to literally say sample. It could say a group of people or some other way of referring to it. But you're talking about a sample mean here clearly, and a group of people. So that means you're going to be talking about the Z for a sample mean or a single sample T. It's got to be one of those two because you're dealing with a sample. Now, how do you decide between those two? If you know the population standard deviation, it's going to be a Z for a sample mean. If you do not know the population standard deviation, and you are only given the sample standard deviation, then you would want to use the single sample T. If it doesn't give you any standard deviation, but it's clear you're dealing with a sample, then you should choose the single sample T because you have the sample data, so you can always compute its standard deviation. That should be everything you need to get you through this activity. Again, to review, if it doesn't mention anything about a sample or a group of scores or a group of people, then you should be using the Z for an individual score. If it does mention a sample, you have to pick between the Z for a sample mean and the single sample T, and you choose between those two based on whether or not you know the population standard deviation. If you do, you want to use the Z for a sample mean. If you don't, you want to use the single sample T. At the end of the activity, you'll have to compute one, after you make your choice, and then after you make that choice, you will be asked to compute the actual Z score or T score or individual score for the Z based on what you choose. Good luck with the activity.